All right. So welcome everyone to this month Limnoseries. I am Lisa. I'll be your host today with Anna. And I will start by briefly introducing the GSA and our speaker today, Thomas Shannon. So quickly, Glion is a global network that gathers scientists from all around the world working on immunology and that conducts international team science to advance the understanding of lakes. And if you do not know us yet, do not hesitate to visit our website. We have an upcoming virtual meeting from the 27th to the 30th, I think. Anna, tell me if I'm wrong, correct me. And
That's
as you
right.
just said, registrations will be open until Friday, so check it out. It could be a nice way to join our network if you're not already part of it. Um, and so we are the GSA, so the Glion Student Association, and our mission is to inform, train, and mentor students to allow them to participate in collaborative, international, and interdisciplinary network science. So here you can see our leaders, Lipa, that is going to rotate soon, Anna, Kirthana, and our GSA advisor, Bastian Blinks. So the GSA is run by students and is for students to get involved in Glion and other activities. So the GSA takes care of different tasks. We have a workshop committee involving a whole lot of people that you can see here. Those people are behind the organization of the workshop and the seminars, like today's seminars, but also during in-person meetings and virtual ones, like the one that will also happen virtually, but kind of linked virtually in Brazil, let's say. We also have a communication team that is taking care of our Slack channel for Glion students, and also host seminars, create content for the Glion website, so like blog posts, flyers, and so on. And finally, we have a poster committee that is in charge of preparing and planning posters during our Glion meetings. So we are taking a few minutes to present you the GSA because we would really love you to join it. We would love to welcome as many students as possible, and for you to take part into those committees. It would be a good opportunity for you to get more involved into Glion, to learn some new skills, and also meet new people. So do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we will gladly add you to our Slack channel and help you get involved into the GSA. Limnoseries are also open to everyone to present. So it can be a workshop, it can be a lecture, it can be just a presentation of your latest research. It is very open, very flexible. So reach out to us or fill out the form that is available probably in your previous emails or here on the PowerPoint. I don't know if the PowerPoint is available though for people somewhere. Um, but anyway, we could share it. And we also have the Glion website where you can find all of the upcoming events and our YouTube channel where you will find the previous Glion Limno series and the next ones to come. So, for our Limno series today, we are welcoming Thomas Shannon as our speaker. Thomas is a postdoctoral researcher at the Florida International University in the USA. He studies how ecosystem functions of benthic algae responds to alteration in wetland hydrological management, so in the Everglades. And in addition to his education in natural sciences, he also has a bachelor in English and creative writing, and he has experience working as a writing fellow. So he believes that his writing training made a difference in his research founding applications and wants to provide the tools for successful grant writing for other students. So hence our Limno series today. So thank you, Tommy, for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with us today about grant writing. And without any further ado, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so hello, I'm Tommy. I'm here today to talk about proposal writing. It is my hope that you will all be able to take something away from this that will be valuable for you to implement in the future when you are doing any sort of proposals. Um, this workshop is geared towards students, but it's certainly not limited towards students. And my intent is to provide tips and tricks that are going to help you be a better persuasive writer and have a strong sense of how to approach proposal writing. Because I think that writing proposals and writing grants is not something that we're really ever trained to do as scientists. We tend to be trained to um, write scientifically and very directly and very unemotionally, and being able to write in order to convince somebody that you should be funded and that your science is worth additional support is a different set of skills. And so that's more what I want to focus on today. But I'm going to start by talking about understanding granting landscapes. So before we start with writing, it's important to know what the landscape around you looks like in terms of finding grant opportunities. And to be perfectly clear, my own personal experience has been with the American system for granting opportunities and proposals. So I'm not the most versed at all of the international opportunities that are available, but I've had some conversations with people that are much more familiar with the international process, and I've tried to include that here. So the largest international opportunity that is going to be available for most people generally, whether you're a grad student or beyond, is going to be the EU. The EU is a really dominant granting body for research. Even if your country is not part of the EU, you can still apply for the vast majority of these grants. Some of them have the stipulation that you have to do some of your research in an EU country. Some of them do not. Most of these grants tend to be really big grants. I would be a little surprised if, as a graduate student, you personally applied for one of these sorts of grants. Many of them, like the Marie Curie grants and the ERC grants, are actually more for postdocs. So once you have your PhD, those are grants that can support you as a starting emerging scientist. And some of these other ones are big project grants that you might be asked to participate in writing a proposal for to support your research or your group's research. EU grants tend to have a strong applied science emphasis. And so if your research is much more focused on basic science, you may struggle to find grants in the EU agencies that are going to support that research. These tend to be oriented towards highlighting what a problem is and finding a solution for that problem through a scientific lens. So if you're doing more basic research, I think you're going to find that national level opportunities may have a lot more applications available for you. The thing about finding national level opportunities for whatever nation you're in or are looking to do research in is that the requirements and the regulations and the opportunities are all over the place. There is no one size fits all for understanding how to navigate these sorts of grants. I can't even try. The recommendation that I've been given is that you want to look at the websites for each of these nations and their granting bodies and find out from those websites specifically exactly what their requirements are, exactly what these sorts of opportunities are available. And that is going to be the way that you're going to have to navigate those systems. I can't provide much more detail on any specific countries granting opportunities, except for the US, which I could if you guys are interested. But I want to frame this more broadly because GLION is an international organization. And then the third level of funding opportunities that you're probably going to find are local opportunities. That's universities, institutes, lake associations, different endowed bodies, and scholarships that are more focused on single issues. So these sorts of local opportunities are going to, the benefit of these is that they're going to be a lot less competitive, right? You aren't competing against people all across the globe. You're competing against the other people who are doing research on the lake that the Lake Association is interested in, right? So you have a better shot of getting these sorts of grants. On the flip side, these grants typically are smaller, but as a graduate student, you probably don't need $1 million grant for whatever you're doing. And these grants also tend to be more focused on particular issues. There we are. Local funding wants local specific applications and solutions. If you're going to be doing an international grant, it's easy to basically apply for whatever it is that you're interested in. If you're doing some sort of a local grant, there's a much greater likelihood that you have to write a proposal that is going to be tailored specifically to the interests of the granting agency, or maybe it's just your local university, in which case they might be a little bit more generally supportive. But in general, the way to find local opportunities is to use local resources, either asking professors who have been around and are in tune with what these sorts of opportunities would be, or reaching out to your particular university grant office. Almost all universities should have an office that is just dedicated to helping students and professors find grant opportunities, because the universities benefit from those grants, and they're more than happy to help you find those opportunities and potentially put together a grant for those sorts of opportunities. Okay, moving on from finding grants. Before we start writing, I'm going to hit this point a number of times over the course of this presentation. It's really important that you orient your writing and your mentality when you write a grant towards writing to the rules. You're going to find that your grants are much more successful if you, before you even start writing, start planning a proposal that is geared towards the particular grant that you are proposing to. It is really important to look at what the solicitations say, what the scope and focus of the grants are, what are the requirements for report backs, what are the deadlines for these grants. If the thing that you want to do does not really fit the criteria and priorities of the grant solicitation, you're going to spend a bunch of time writing a grant that kind of twists what you're doing into fitting what they have in mind. And you're going to find that you're probably not super successful. You're better off either proposing something different or finding a different granting agency that is more oriented towards what you initially wanted to do. But reading the rules and writing to the rules of the grant is super important. Before you start writing anything, you have to have a grant in mind and really understand the components of that, the grant and what they want you to write about. So, okay, I'm going to start with some general tips for writing now. When you start writing, these are things that I think are helpful to keep in mind. And this first thing is similar to what I was just talking about. You write to the rules. You also need to write to your audience. When you are writing persuasively, especially, it's really important for you to write to your audience. But anytime you're writing, it's important to know who your audience is and write to your audience. If you are writing a grant, not a grant proposal, but simply a research proposal that is only going to be seen by your major professor and your committee, write to those 5 or 6 people. There's no need to describe basic definitions. You can dive right into the meat of what you're doing because they already know the broad details. They already possibly know much of the justification. They're going to be much more interested in the details and the specifics. However, if you are trying to write a proposal that is going to be reviewed by a panel of experts that are general experts in the field of aquatic research, but are not experts in your particular system, right? You don't know whether they're going to be experts in oceans or rivers or lakes, and you're writing specifically about one part of the lake. You need to tailor your writing to fit what those people already know and what they probably don't yet know. So you provide the definitions that are useful to them. And also you can appeal to a sense of who they are. If you are, for example, writing a grant for a association called We Love Birds All Over the World, and you're writing about lakes, you're going to have to write more generally. You're going to have to define basic terms that you might not otherwise define. And also, you're going to have to remind your audience why your research about lakes is important for birds, probably talking about migratory birds and waterfowl and things like that. So writing to your audience is really important for connecting with your audience and getting a positive response for your audience. My second general piece of advice for writing, and this is what we're going to be doing in the workshop component, is to start with a skeleton. The other word for this would be to start with an outline. But I like the word skeleton because once you have a skeleton, that thing has a form, and you should know what that form really looks like. And if you simply, I'm going to start with an outline, and you kind of just generally outline what you're doing, then you look at the outline, you go, cool, and I'm going to start adding all the filler in, you might miss philosophically, I suppose, the concept that like, if I have a skeleton, I know this thing needs a head, it needs arms, it needs a rib cage, it needs legs, right? And proposal writing is typically more formulaic like that. And so it's important to have this reminder that you want to build the fundamental components, the basic underlying infrastructure of what your grant is going to look like before you start adding all the details, before you add the meat. And writing a skeleton, I think, allows you to take a step back and look at the whole shape of the thing. And maybe you go, oh, I forgot the legs of my skeleton, right? I forgot to write a justification. I forgot to write what the statistical analyses are going to be that I'm going to use, things like that. So we're going to walk through writing skeletons later on. But for now, following on our Halloween spooky theme, my next piece of advice is to write sentences as clean as a bone. And that is actually a quote coming from, oh my gosh, I just forgot his name, James Baldwin. James Baldwin was an excellent American writer and thinker. And he had this piece of advice: write a sentence as clean as a bone. And what he means by that is that you don't have the space or the time or enough of your audience's attention to write big, fluffy, drone-on sentences with all of these details. When you're writing a grant, you typically do not have a lot of space for all those extra details. And the more you can write clean sentences that are clear and get to the point, the more you are going to make the person who is reading your grant happy, because you are going to get them to the end of your writing as quickly as possible with as much understanding as possible about what it is that you are trying to do. The happier you can make the person who is reviewing your grant or your application, the more likely you are to have a successful application. So I would recommend against making long lists and providing lots of adjectives. Write as cleanly and as simply as you can, and you will find that it makes for much more successful proposals. This next piece of advice is more geared towards grant writing specifically. Write persuasively. As scientists, we are trained to write scientifically. We are trained to write in passive tense. We're trained to write without bias. We're trained to write in a very descriptive sense. But when you're writing a grant, you are very specifically working to convince a group of people, or at least one person, that this proposed research is worth their time and attention and money, that you, as a researcher, are the best person to be doing the science that they want to fund, that your research is important for reasons that matter to the person that is reading this. And all of those things require that you actually write persuasively, which is something that we are not trained to do as scientists. So we're going to talk a little bit later on about how to write persuasively, how to provide justifications, and how to do that in a way that is appropriate within the setting and context of a scientific proposal. But it's worth keeping in mind that you really do have to push yourself a little bit to go beyond what you may be comfortable with in terms of writing persuasively and writing to convince somebody that this, out of all the submitted applications, this is the thing that they should be funding. And then my final piece of writing advice is for any writing you ever do: start early, revise thoroughly. The earlier you can get started with any writing project, the more comfortable and confident you are going to be in your own writing, and the more time and opportunity you are going to have to do the sorts of revisions that are necessary, from taking a skeleton to a body, and then from a body to a well-polished, successful proposal. If you try to cram in an entire proposal in the week before it's due, your chances of success are going to be much lower than if you give yourself 3 months and write a good draft. Then you revise that draft. Then you send it out to people to look over. They give you feedback. You make adjustments according to what they say. You do a final revision, and then you submit it, right? All of those revision steps are what really improve any writing into being a super successful piece of writing. And when you're writing competitively for money, it is really worthwhile to take your time and do the revisions that are necessary to make that writing as good as it possibly can be. Okay, so those are my general rules for writing. I'm going to immediately suggest that we break some of those rules, possibly, because now we're going to start talking about research proposals. Oh, sorry, hold on. Is this? Okay, well, I've got one more slide then before we start talking about the actual workshop component. But let's talk about research proposals. When you propose research, there are 3 critical components that I have found are successful in getting funding. These are the things being needed, being novel, and being attainable. You have to have all 3 of those components provided in your proposal if you want to receive funding. And I've heard this from many other people. This is advice that I've given other people. Show the reader that your proposed research isn't just a cool idea, isn't just something that would be really neat, but really is something that is needed. That is what is going to put your proposal at the top of the stack of proposals, is something that is needed more than simply wanted. Show how your proposal is novel. How is this new? How is this taking research in a new direction? How are you doing something that has not been done before, or in a system that has not been approached before with whatever technique you're using? Being new and novel is another way that you're going to find that you're more successful in these applications, because people want to fund things that haven't been done before. Unfortunately, that's simply the way it is. I know that science is predicated on being able to do repetition and repeat experiments and come up with similar or unsimilar results. But when you're applying for research, it really is useful to show somebody that you are doing something that hasn't been done before, that you aren't simply copying something that was done before. Or if you are, you need to make that clear and demonstrate why that repetition is necessary in order to validate a model or in order to validate a theory. And then this third component is almost the most important component. Research has to be attainable. There is no point. You could have the most necessary, most new idea in the world. And if the person reading your proposal doesn't think that you're actually going to be able to do that research and pull it off, they're not going to give you money, because that would be a waste of their money and your time. So if you write that you're going to solve cancer, or you're going to stop every harmful algal bloom in the world, that sounds great, and it's needed, and it's new, but it's not feasible. And so those proposals probably aren't going to get funded. Okay, so once you have a project idea that is needed, novel, and attainable, the other important reminder here is that the science itself must be solid. You are going to be proposing this research to be reviewed by people who are knowledgeable, who are experts. You are not going to be able to BS your way through with a really cool idea and wishy-washy science. It is really important that you provide the information necessary in your proposal around what is my scientific design? What is my hypothesis? What is my replication? What are the analytical procedures that I'm going to be using? Do all of those things make sense? Are there any glaring holes in my project design that could invalidate the entire thing? If you have solid science, you're going to be funded. And if you don't, you really can't get away with hand waving the actual scientific components of your proposal. Yeah, I think that there are situations in which you might be able to, but not in some sort of a competitive grant. You're going to be up against other people that have super solid science, and it's not worth your own time to propose something where the science isn't solid. Coming back to this again, answer all parts of the prompt and of the solicitation. I've personally seen a number of examples in which people write excellent proposals with solid science about really important stuff. They have a really competitive proposal, but they forget to include some component that was asked for in a solicitation, or they do not follow the instructions to the letter. And because of that, their proposals are kicked out. Most bodies that are reviewing these sorts of proposals are going to be getting, especially for the most competitive proposals, a lot of proposals. And they're looking for any reason at all to remove papers from the stack that they have to look through. And so, as an example, I had a friend who was applying for the US's GRFP. It's a graduate fellowship. And she wrote up an amazing proposal, and she submitted it. And she received a response back a couple of days later that said, hey, your citations, this one line of citations at the very end of your proposal was in 9 size font, and we require that it be in 10 size font or larger. And so your proposal will not be considered. We're sorry. And that was that. And she got no, well, she did get another opportunity, but she had to wait in the next year. And she did. And she resubmitted the next year, following all of the instructions using 10-point font. And she actually was awarded. So It's just to say that you really have to pay attention to the regulations and the guidelines. And if you don't, they're more than likely just going to kick out your proposal. If you're working for somebody who you're very familiar with and you're on good terms, maybe they're going to say, hey, will you fix these things? Will you add this and get it back to us? But that's pretty unlikely. I think most of these more competitive environments are going to simply remove your proposal from the stack. It's really, really important to answer all components of the prompt, follow all of the rules. The easiest way to do that I've found is to find and imitate successful proposals from that particular granting body. So if you are trying to get some of the larger grants, I think you will be able to find on Reddit or online in other places lists of successful proposals, people that are happy to post what they did that was successful. And you can then look through exactly how they structured their proposal. How much space did they dedicate to an introduction? How much detail did they go into in their methods section? How did they format their citations? How many citations did they use? Those are the sorts of things where if you can look at a number of successful proposals and build yours in the same manner, you are going to elevate your chances of success. If you are applying for a small local grant, typically they're going to list the people that have in the past received that grant. And if you know any of them or are familiar with the labs that some of them have come through, I think it's entirely fair to send those people an email and say, hey, I am looking to apply for this particular grant. I saw that you were a successful applicant in the past, and I would love to know if you would be willing to provide me with what your grant looked like so that I can be as successful as possible. I've had people do this to me, and I am more than happy to share. And I think that most people would be. Maybe people, I mean, people are free to say no, but I think that it is more than likely that people will be happy to help you and share the wealth of success. And then my final point on this, answering to the prompt and answering to the solicitation, is that especially for these larger grants, well, for every grant is going to have a rubric. And many of the larger ones and more public ones will actually post that rubric online. This is what the granting people are using to evaluate every grant so that they can do it in a standardized way, right? To what extent was the introduction compelling? To what extent did it seem like they were going to be able to do this within a certain amount of time? Whatever that rubric is, if you can find that rubric, write to the rubric. Make sure that what you are submitting checks off the box with the most points across the entire rubric, and you will more than likely find yourself with a successful proposal because you are playing the game, as it were. Grant writing and grant applications are not always necessarily about whose science and research is the absolute best. It's about whose proposal is the most convincing and is best able to check all the boxes, which is kind of strange to say, but I think it is true. The granting agencies have to have some sort of an established method for filtering through all of these things and evaluating all of these proposals. And if you are able to meet all of the criteria and exceed perhaps all of the criteria that they're using, you're going to be at the top of the list. So in competitive granting environments, it's really worth finding those rubrics, writing to the rubrics. It's the same like a standardized test, right? It's not really measuring your intelligence, it's measuring how good you are at taking a test. Sometimes grants can be the same way. Okay, so now we are going to get into the writing exercise component of this workshop. My idea here is that I want you all to think about a research project that you either are going to be proposing or are currently working on, or simply you can make one up. You can invent one in your head right now. Um, Obviously, if you have one in mind that you're going to be proposing soon, this may have more value to you in the more immediate sense. But the idea here is that even if you're just making something up right now, the act of going through the writing process is important and is going to make you more comfortable and more familiar with writing grants in the future. And I also think that the series of proposal elements that I've outlined provide a useful general formula for writing successful grants. Obviously, when you go to actually write a grant for a particular agency, you're going to have to change your skeleton and change your components to fit that particular grant. But in general, I think that I'm going to have us walk through components of grant writing that will be useful across the board. So what I want us to do is, as you're thinking about your research project, this either fantasy or this immediately upcoming proposal that you have, what we're going to do is, as we go through the next series of slides, I want you to write down 1 to 2 sentences or just bullet points per element, per bullet point that I'm going to go over, focused on that project idea. On each of these, I'm going to talk for a little bit. We'll pause for 90 seconds per element, and then we'll move on to the next one. I have created a document, a Word document, that contains all of these proposal elements. You should have received it when you received the link to this Zoom meeting. If you want to use that as your template, you are more than welcome to do so, because it just includes all of the components. And if you just want to fill it out as you go along, you may find that useful. Otherwise, you're welcome to write these down however you like. And yes, then our goal is, once we reach certain checkpoints, we are going to break into small groups of 2 or 3 and have you share with one another what you have so far, so that you can provide each other with constructive feedback on how you think the writing process is going for one another. The last point I want to make here is, don't overthink this. It's not worth spending agony and too much time thinking about one particular component of this. The idea is to simply get something down on paper, move on to the next part. We're just building a skeleton. And then the revision process is really what makes that skeleton into something that's fantastic. But we're going to go through the skeleton process. So we're going to start with the introduction, okay? And the very first component of the introduction that is critical to include in a research proposal is demonstrating why your study subject is broadly important. You have to start by talking about why your subject at large is something that the people reading your proposal are going to care about. And I recommend using numbers and social value to talk about why this is important. This is a lesson that I learned from The Little Prince when I was young, is that adults care about numbers. Adults don't necessarily care if you say, I saw a beautiful house with red shingles and white fencing. But if you say, I saw a huge house that was 400 square meters and had a net worth estimated at $2.5 million, people are more likely to perk up their ears and listen for whatever reason. And when you're doing proposals, it's the same thing. I know that we all care very dearly about our subjects that we're studying. And it is easy for us to talk about how cute a fish is or something. But when you are trying to justify why your research should be receiving funding, use numbers and social value. So the for each of these, I'm going to provide in italics an example that I've created that I think may be helpful for you all as you go through these. I did my example about coral reefs, so not incredibly relevant to limnology, but still. I said coral reefs are a cornerstone of marine life and diversity, providing 1/7 of the global human population with its primary food supply. Cite that fact. In Florida, reefs support $4 billion in annual revenue via recreation and commercial fishing. And I'd cite that fact too, and I'd move on. Okay, so now I'm going to give us 90 seconds to have all of you write down for your study subject why it is broadly important. Go ahead. All right, that was 90 seconds. I would love to know if you all felt like that was enough time, or if you would like more time, or if that was too much time. You can give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or just type in the chat or whatever. But it would be great to know if, for the rest of these, you would like more than 90 seconds or not, if that was okay. Let me know. Okay, I'm not sure full meeting window. Okay, well, I'm not seeing anything, so I'm going to assume that that worked for everybody, and we'll continue on as was. Okay. Um, the second element here that we're going to talk about is what is the problem at hand? If you are proposing to do some research, there should be some driving force behind what motivated you to want to do this research. And typically, if you can frame this as a problem that has some sort of a potential solution, you are going to find that you are more successful in getting people on board with giving you money. So uh, um, the example that I have here is human-caused increases in ocean heat, acidity, and pollution have led to a loss of over 50% of reefs in the last 30 years alone, and 90% may die in the next century. Now, obviously, I know that not all of us are studying something as massive and globally impactful as the death of global coral reefs. That's okay. Even if you are focusing your research and your proposal on something that is basic science, there is still something about what you are doing that is an issue. Maybe there is a theory that needs to be validated. Maybe there is some discrepancy in previous findings around a particular idea. Maybe there must be something that is making this effort of yours worthwhile doing. That's what I want you to try to illustrate here. So I'm going to give us another 90 seconds to go over that and write that down. All right, that was 90 seconds. We're going to move on to now the third component, which is what is already known about the problem. So as we do this, you'll notice we are going from the broad to the specific. We are funneling down to your proposed research. So as we start talking about what is already known about the problem, provide details that become more relevant to what it is that you in particular are proposing. So here I'm going to provide as an example, the primary cause of coral death is when corals kick out their stressed and non-functional endosymbiotic algae and then starve. All right, 90 seconds, write down. And again, just don't think about it too much. No need to actually go Google stuff. What is already known about the problem? Okay, now that we've written down what is already known about the problem, we're going to follow up by highlighting what is not yet known about the problem. When you write this down, again, we are using this now as justification for why our proposed research is important. So focus on components that are unknown about this issue that your research is going to help fill in the gaps on. So my example here is going to be, it is possible that other stress-tolerant endosymbiotic algae may be able to replace the non-tolerant algae and support continued coral growth. But the diversity, stress tolerance, and symbiosis acceptance rates of these species has not yet been determined. Okay, go ahead and write down what is not yet known about the problem, but which your proposal may help solve. Okay. We're more than halfway done with this section. We're going to move on to once we know, or once you have described what is not yet known about the issue at hand. Now, what are you going to do to advance a novel solution to the problem? I'm not saying that you have to provide that you're going to solve the problem. Simply describe how your research is going to help us as a research community or as managers of lakes or as a global society to gain more insight into solving the problem and how you're going to do that in a new way. What are you going to do to advance a novel solution? And here's how I'm going to provide an example of that is to assess the potential for heat-tolerant algae species to support continued coral production with increased warming. I will conduct experimental heat stress trials using 8 rare algae species thought to be heat tolerant. Okay, go ahead and write down. Now you're starting to really dig into like, what is your proposal going to be about, right? What are you going to be doing here? Describe what your proposal is about and how it is going to be filling the gap that is so far been left open that you illustrated in point 4. Go ahead. Okay, now that we have outlined what our proposals are going to be about and how they're going to help solve the issue we've outlined. State your hypothesis. This is where you really nail down exactly what it is that you expect to have happen. And I really would emphasize that it is useful and valuable in proposals to provide an actual scientific hypothesis. I think this is going to happen because this, if then because. When you write these down, I would recommend that you actually keep your hypothesis in bold. And I recommend doing this for most grant proposals too, if they allow it. The idea here is that it is easy for the people reviewing your grant to find your hypothesis and be reminded of your hypothesis throughout the reading process if it's in bold. And those little things that make it slightly easier for somebody to read your hypothesis are going to make it that much more likely that they're going to be happy and willing to award you a grant. So the way I've done this is I hypothesize that algae species which maximize both heat tolerance and photosynthetic rate will support the highest rates of coral survival. Go ahead and write down your hypothesis. Okay, hopefully you've written down your hypotheses and aren't agonizing over the details of your hypothesis, which is very easy to do. Again, we're just moving through these at an elevated rate so that we can work on them together. The final part here, once you've stated your hypothesis, is to do a brief wrap up. How will assessment of your hypothesis help solve the problem? It is always worth reminding the reader why what you are doing or are going to do is going to help solve the problem, right? My example here would be results of this research may reveal algae species that can be inoculated into coral reefs worldwide to support coral resilience to climate change. Again, I know that not everyone is going to have a potential solution that is that ambitious and broad, but there is something about what you are doing that will help answer that fundamental question or reveal something about a system that is going to be useful to other people and is going to help address the underlying reason that you're doing this research. Remind your reader of what that is. Even if it feels obvious to you, these are people that are not nearly as familiar with your research, and giving consistent reminders about why this research is relevant to the issue you are helping to solve is going to make it more useful and valuable for them to want to give you a grant. All right, go ahead. Okay, congratulations. You have all just written an introduction. Um, Now, what I want you to do is imagine that this introduction is the skull of your skeleton. Take a couple minutes. I've gotten 3 minutes here to look over and revise your skeleton. As you look over the shape of what this looks like, make sure that the writing is coherent across the whole thing, that it is internally consistent in terms of what your focus is. This is just a little opportunity to revise what you've written so far as an introduction before we start discussing them with other people. And then we will break into small groups and share and discuss amongst each other what you've written. So go ahead and take 3 minutes now, and then we'll talk about what those discussions will look like. Okay. The plan now is to go into small breakout groups. Um, Probably this will be groups of two. Maybe you'll find yourself in a group of three. The idea here is to simply share what you've written with your partner and have them provide some feedback on uh, what you've written. The things to consider I've listed down at the bottom, I think is maybe the most important things to consider, but obviously don't feel limited to focusing on those things. But I think that emphasizing, does the introduction convey why this research is important and needed? Does the proposed research clearly address the presented problem? And does anything feel like it is missing or unclear? Are the things that are most valuable for you to get feedback on from somebody else? When we look at our own research, it is often we don't know what other people don't know, right? And this is an opportunity to receive easy, helpful feedback from other people on um, what our writing looks like and what they think we might be able to improve on. Um, my plan is if you're in groups of two, spend 5 minutes per person. Um, maybe provide 2 minutes going over what you've written down and then 3 minutes talking about it. Um, so, okay, we can go ahead and go to breakout groups now. Okay, so now that we have shared and discussed, we are going to go on to the second section here, which is talking about methods in our research proposal. The methods section is going to be fairly similar to what you might put in a more detailed paper, but they don't necessarily need to be so detailed. You need to provide enough methods that, and again, you're providing methods for something you have not done yet. So you're providing projected methods. You need to provide enough detail that the people that are reading this can know that what you're doing is sound science, but you do not need to provide so much methods detail that they get overwhelmed by all of it. To be perfectly honest, that's typically not what they're most critically evaluating is the details of your methods. They just need to know that what you're doing is sound science and that what you're going to do is feasible, right? So in order to do that, I would say the first point that we're going to go over, and I didn't put numbers on these, but is describe your experimental or your observational or your methodological setup. You know, if you're making a model, describe your inputs and outputs for the model. If you're describing an experiment, what are your dependent and your independent variables? What are the controls? And what is the level of replication that you're planning on using? So go ahead and take 90 seconds to write down broadly what those things are. Okay, that was 90 seconds. Um, hopefully that was enough time to just put down the skeleton of what your method section looks like. Um, for the next component, I want you to write down and describe what the important logistics and feasibility are pertaining to this. This is something that's a little bit more unique to a grant, right? You need to describe to the people that are reviewing this how much space, how much time is going to be needed in order to actually carry this out. What are the tools and the infrastructure that you need? If you need assistance from other people, what does that look like as well? So go ahead, take 90 seconds, write down all the things that are logistically important for carrying out your study. Go. All right. Um, Now that we've written down the logistics associated with our planned study, we're going to go over, and I want you to describe what the analytical or statistical procedures are that you're going to be using to assess your hypothesis. Um, I know I might have to adjust this advice because I know you're doing something that is more model driven, which doesn't necessarily fit exactly this. But in that case, what metrics are you using to assess how your model is successful and how your model is actually going to be uh, implemented, I suppose, for other people? And if you're not using a model based thing, talk about, are you using an ANOVA? Are you using a t-test? Um, how are you assessing what your hypothesis's outcomes are? Go ahead and take 90 seconds. All right. Um, and then the final section here is I would like for you to write a data statement. And this is something you are probably less familiar with. Um, but I have found that many publications and many granting agencies now are becoming much more aware and cognizant of the importance of storing data and publishing data. Um, And if you, as someone writing a proposal, include a solid data statement telling these people how your data and code are going to be handled, how it will be stored, will you have backups, will it be published in a public repository, just telling them that you have a plan for what the data is going to look like and what that plan is really attractive. And that is the sort of component that is really going to put your proposal above and beyond the other proposals that you're competing against. So um, I would encourage you all to write down a data statement in 90 seconds, simply outlining how your data is going to be handled and published. If you don't know, I'd love to chat with you a little bit afterwards about the potential opportunities for storing data. But just write something down for now. Go ahead. All right, congratulations. You've just written a method section for your upcoming proposal. Um, Now would be the time when originally I had planned for us to break into groups again, discuss, and then come back. Um, I guess we can skip this for now, unless you all feel strongly that you'd like to spend some time talking about this section. Um, but when you review this and you look it over, I would encourage you to consider these bullet points here, which is that um, is the experimental setup easy to understand? Is the proposed work logistically feasible? Do the proposed methods clearly align with the presented hypothesis? And is anything missing or unclear? If you can answer confidently for all those questions, great. If not, consider doing revisions that are oriented towards addressing those potential concerns. Okay, rather than do a 10-minute breakout, let's continue. And we're going to talk about the final component of writing a research proposal, which is the justification. Okay. Now, from an American perspective, I am used to justifications being explicitly broken into two components: intellectual merit and broader impacts. I know that that's not the way that all grants are, but I do feel that there is value in considering mentally how your proposal is fitting both the categories of intellectual merit and broader impacts for any proposal, because pretty much any proposal is going to be interested in knowing how your research is going to address both of these components. So I'm going to list a series of um, possible intellectual merit justifications. Um, and I would like for you all to write down at least two of them. Try to address at least two of them. I'm not um, saying that you necessarily need to be able to answer every single one of these justification bullet points, but I think that if you can, you will find that you have a really solid proposal. But go ahead and take, we'll say 3 minutes and write down answers to at least two of these three questions. What is the fundamental scientific question or theory that this research helps answer? How does this research advance human knowledge? And does this research facilitate the advancement of other current or future research? Go ahead and take 3 minutes. Okay. Now that you have written down some intellectual merit justifications for how your research is helping to facilitate an advancement in science, um, we are going to focus more on how your research is helping to focus and facilitate improvements to people and society at large. These are considered the broader impacts. Um, so I'm going to again list a series of bullet points, and I would encourage you to write down at least two answers to these bullet point questions, right? Respond to at least two of these points. Um, and then we can, as a group, go over and discuss uh, how we think these are being applied to our study system. So, how will the results of this research help people and or the world? How might the results of this research be used to make management or policy decisions? How will this research provide research experiences and opportunities for others, right? And how will this research be implemented to improve the general public's perception or understanding of your subject? Go ahead and again, we'll take 3 minutes to answer, at least try to do two of these bullet points. Go ahead. All right. Hopefully, that was enough time for everybody to go over providing some justifications for the research. So, in a minute, I want to encourage us to go back into breakout rooms and to discuss with one another what our ideas were pertaining to. I think it would be most valuable to focus on the justification components. If you're paired with somebody new, just provide a brief synopsis of the proposal. You don't have to go back over the introduction and all that other stuff. And discuss the considerations that I've listed down at the bottom here. Keeping in mind the timing of this presentation and being respectful of all of your time, one thing I would like to do is go one more slide ahead and talk about the final component, which I don't want us to write down, but I just want to present to you all before we stop the recording so that other people who are watching this back later have the information, which is that there are some additional elements of a research proposal to consider. Those are going to include a conclusion. This can be 1 to 2 sentences at the very end that, like in the introduction, summarizes what is the problem, how does your research address the problem, and what are the project deliverables? What are you going to do to provide in return for this grant money that is going to help solve this problem? I think it is very useful and important to be able to provide a simple timeline and budget breakdown alongside your proposal. Sometimes people will want this to be actually in the text of the proposal. If you're doing a timeline, consider a Gantt chart. Gantt charts are, you can see an example of one here, but it's a simple tool that just shows how much time and when are you going to be dedicating to each component of this research project. It's a good way to demonstrate to the people, the granting people, that you have this all planned out, that there is a clear end date by which you expect to have everything done by, and that often is useful for them for knowing when they should expect your project deliverables by. And then the last thing I would say on this point is if you provide a budget breakdown, you have a unique opportunity to earmark unique expenses. If there is something in particular that you think would be valuable for your research, that you can include specifically in the research proposal, I would recommend that you do so. Because there are some things, especially computer software or electronics or particular pieces of equipment that, say your university is the one that's actually handling the money. If you get awarded this grant and then you go, hey, I'd like to purchase this thing with my grant money, they may say, we don't think that's within the scope of your project or something. But if you can say, no, I have a approved proposal and an approved budget that says I'm going to purchase these things with this money, then you're going to get approved for purchasing those things. So list out your unique expenses if you think that that may be an issue down the line. And then finally, graphics are really nice if you find that you have the space and the time to provide these in your hypotheses or in your proposals. BioRender is a really fantastic website that you can use for doing scientific illustrations for what's your hypothesis, what is your setup. The paid version does cost a decent bit of money, but there is a free version. Otherwise, I would recommend Inkscape, which is a little harder to learn to use, but is totally free and has total control over everything that you're doing. Okay. Now, I'm just going to go back. That was the end of the research project component of this talk. If we want, I know that it is now, it's been 2 hours. If you have the time and would like to stay on for a discussion, you are more than welcome to do so. If you need to get going, I want to respect everybody's time. Yeah, now may be the time when we can go into small breakout groups and discuss what we have written so far. If there are only a few people that are able to stay on but would like to, I suppose we can stay in a larger room and talk amongst ourselves in that fashion as well.